Lynn Cooper, and I'd like to welcome you all this afternoon on behalf of the Psychology Department. It's a pleasure to see how many people have turned out and taken time out of their busy schedules to come hear our distinguished speaker today. Oh, that's right, I don't have my slides, I forgot. So we'll just have to imagine slides up there, okay? This year's Distinguished Lecture Series focuses on a topic of deep meaning and significance to us all, the bonds we share physically, emotionally, spiritually, and in a lot of other ways with close others in our lives. This year's series includes 6 distinguished speakers. This is our 3rd speaker and the last one for this semester. However, we have 3 outstanding speakers next semester, and I had great photos of them. I was going to really entice you all with these lovely photos of our very interesting looking speakers, but I can't do that today. I apologize. Oh, there we go. Thanks. So anyway, we do have 3 speakers next semester, and they're posters, hopefully all over campus, and you'll be getting notifications and things, so hopefully you won't miss those dates or anything, because now I don't have them in my head and they're not displayed for you. But before we get on with the important business today, I did just want to acknowledge the contributions of a number of departments and generous individuals without whose support we would not be here today. So I'm going to read this list since, again, it's not displayed. The College of Human and Environmental Science, Department of Communication, the Department of Health Psychology, the Department of Philosophy, Department of Women's and Gender Studies, the Sinclair School of Nursing, School of Social Work, and Dean Michael O'Brien, who has donated quite a lot of money very generously to this series. I'd also like to acknowledge support from the Grimshaw Distinguished Lecture Series, the Fred McKinney Psychology Lectureship, and the Melvin H. and Kathleen Marks Experimental Psychology Fund. There are a lot of people also in the College of Arts and Science, particularly Melody Galen, who does all of our nice promotional materials, and Kelly Davis, who is assistant to this series and does everything that nobody else wants to do. So she deserves a lot of credit. So it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce to you Dr. David Geary. Dave received his PhD at the University of California, Riverside in 1986 and then moved on to faculty positions at the University of Texas, El Paso and the University of Missouri at Rolla before finally coming here to Columbia in 1989. I think I got that right, yeah? Okay. Dave currently holds 2 distinguished professorships. One isn't enough. The Thomas Jefferson Distinguished Professorship, which is a highly competitive system-wide honor, and the Curator's Distinguished Professorship. I just closed your computer. Hopefully it'll come right back up when we open it. Dave has published nearly 200 articles, commentaries, and chapters across a wide range of topics, including cognitive developmental psychology, education, medicine, as well as evolutionary psychology, which is the focus of his talk today. Dave has written or co-written 4 books on very diverse topics, including children's mathematics, evolutionary psychology, sex differences. Among his many awards and accomplishments, Dave has received the Chancellor's Award for Creative Research and Achievement in the Humanities and Social Sciences in 1996, held a Middlebush Professorship from 2000 to 2003, has 2 distinguished professorships now, as previously mentioned, and he also received a Scientific Merit Award from NIH and was appointed by President Bush to the National Board of Directors for the Institute for Education Sciences. Thus, we are really fortunate to have someone as accomplished as Dave on our faculty, and especially privileged to hear from David today. So I'd like to turn the program over to Dave, and I really hope I didn't screw you up.
All right, well, let's see.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Thought I was going to have a blank slate talk. All right, so I'll just get right to it. Thanks for that introduction. The basic question here is, what is the origin of human sex differences? Where do the differences that we see come from? Now, many psychologists and social scientists will argue that gender stereotypes and normative adherence to these, so you grow up in a culture, boys do this, girls do this, you identify yourself as a boy or a girl, and therefore you try to model your behavior, adhere to what the culture says you're supposed to do. So adherence to these is the primary cause of observed sex differences. However, empirically, based on an assessment of stereotypes across 25 different cultures, Best and Williams concluded that turns out that in the area of stereotypes, they're very, very similar across all of these different cultures. And they concluded, based on the similarities across cultures, that there's evidence for pan-cultural similarities, and that these similarities greatly outweigh the evidence for cultural differences. But still, there is variation across cultures, and therefore kind of culture-specific differences in these stereotypes. And so what we need to do is figure out what is the source of the pan-cultural similarities in sex differences and stereotypes, as well as many others that I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to, that's our first question, and I'm going to argue that Darwin's sexual selection, expressed in many different ways, is really the best explanation for these pan-cultural similarities. I'm also going to show you across species that biology does not mean socially that males, females are socially or ecologically inflexible, or that biology is deterministic. There's many different ways to express evolved biases. And of course, the question is, can we apply what we learn from other species to our own species in trying to understand sex differences? Now, as Best and Williams found, there is a core of sex differences that seem to be universal, but there are also differences across cultures. And we want to know not only the core, but what is it about these different cultures, different ecologies that they're in, that explain this variability. And even more interesting, does the variation make sense? If differences are exaggerated in one culture versus another, why? Is there something going on in this context that's not going on in this other context that is understandable based on these kind of proximate social conditions? So we have a lot to cover today, off to a late start, but we'll get through it. So this is from Darwin's Descent of Man. And the basic question is, why do we get these differences? So we have the chameleons there, the beetles, and the species of antelope. And Darwin observed, and many others before him, that there were differences between males and females. In fact, these beetles here were thought to be members of different species for quite some time, until they were caught in the act. And then it was determined that, well, in fact, they are just males and females of the same species. They just look very different. And we can explain many, many of these sex differences across many, many species with just two basic principles. One, intrasexual competition, competition with members of the same sex for access to the most desirable mate, or the most mates, or I'll give examples of this here in a bit, and intersexual choice. So discriminative choice of mating partners. People don't mate randomly, typically, and neither do beetles or chameleons or any other species that I'm aware of. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of these processes, how they vary across species, how they can vary within species, and then we're going to talk about how they apply to people. So all of you have seen many nature shows where you have males beating on one another. In fact, you can watch that on, for people. It's called Cops. It's the best sitcom on television, one of my favorites. Anyway, so this is northern elephant seals. You have the females in the back just hanging out, soaking up the sun, and the males beating on one another. And in this situation, for this species, females tend to congregate in fairly small areas. Males then have the opportunity to dominate access to large numbers of females. In those situations, you get advantages to large size and aggressiveness. And so in this case, the males are competing physically as an attempt to gain social dominance, in this case, just to push out competitors. So physical male-male competition for dominance is common. Male-male competition is more common than female-female competition across species, although it does occur in species where males provide some parental investment. So what you get is bigger, meaner males have an advantage. So over generations, you get the evolution of bigger and meaner males. And you see these males are much bigger than their conspecific females, or their same species females. Now, this isn't the only way to get dates. Some males will try to, these guys are fighting here, another male will sneak down here and try to hook up with one of the females here, and these are called sneaky males, or sometimes when the females are heading off to forage, they'll try to intercept her. And whether that's really an alternative mating strategy, meaning it's just as good as this one, or whether it's just kind of forced on these males until they get big enough to compete is not clear, but there's different ways to skin a cat or a female seal. Now, there's other ways to compete. Still intrasexual competition, but here, rather than beating on each other, which they still do to some extent, here we have behavioral competition. So this is a bower. This is a satin bowerbird. And these males of bowerbird species build these complex behavioral structures, these complex wood structures. They're not nests. The females have their own nests elsewhere. And the males build these as a way to try to attract the females. So he's got this build. He's got all of his bower bling. And the males with more bower bling, more colorful stuff, get more attention from females. What's interesting about this species is not only that competition is very, very complex and behavioral, is we see some big developmental differences. So females begin to reproduce at 2, males mature at 7, meaning they begin to produce sperm at 7, but almost never reproduce before 10. And in fact, the vast majority of males will never get a date, not even one. So few males sire most of the females. So what are these males doing during this time? So during this period of immaturity, the males actually look like females in terms of coloration, so they can watch the dominant males, and they do that. And then when the dominant males take off, they go and they imitate. They practice bower building, they practice mating displays and fighting prior to actual competition. So this delayed developmental period has a lot of learning. So to be good at this and be competitive, you have to have experience as well as testosterone and sort of other biological types of things. Now, male bowerbirds with lots of testosterone have lots of bling and lots of sticks in their bowers, and they're often more aggressive behaviorally with other males, but their bowers may not be very symmetrical looking. It may be a bunch of stuff there, but it doesn't look very cool. If it doesn't look cool, the females aren't going to visit. And so for the bowers to actually look good, you need all of this behavioral practice, experience, social imitation, other types of things. You get a kind of a combination of things going on there. So it's a different way of competing, but it's still male-male competition. Male-male competition can also affect brain evolution and cognitive evolution. This has been demonstrated for spatial abilities and also with birdsong and other things. So here we have a meadow vole, and here we have, I believe that's a pine vole. And these guys are cousins, which means they had a recent common ancestor. So genetically, they're fairly similar to one another, but their mating systems are very different. The meadow voles are polygynous, meaning that they kind of roam around and try to get as many girlfriends as they can get. And the pine and prairie voles are monogamous. Once they hook up, they stay that way and they provide some care. Now, rather than beating on one another, although they'll do that occasionally, or building nests or other types of things, these guys compete through scramble competition. So what we have here is these are female territories. So females will kind of, that's how much space, land they need to kind of get enough food for themselves. They'll build their nests on that territory. And then during the mating season, but not on other seasons, and associated with increases in testosterone during the mating season, these guys expand their territory, meaning they begin to roam around and they visit all of the females on, in this expanded territory, which means that males who are able to court more females on average, because they have a larger territory, will have an advantage over males who are only able to court a few females. In theory, that's the case, and in practice, studies of spatial abilities in the laboratory and in the field show that male meadow voles have much better spatial abilities than female meadow voles, and they have much better spatial abilities than male prairie and pine voles. Now, there are alternative mating strategies among meadow voles, but it's generally the case that males with better spatial abilities have higher reproductive success, presumably because they can court more females. Okay, so here we see the same basic thing, male-male competition, but because females are dispersed in the ecology, rather than clumped together as they are with the northern elephant seals, the males have to compete in a different way. So rather than fighting over access for kind of a clumped group of females, they have to develop, they compete via spatial abilities and exploring the environment and looking for the nests of females. And so we see the evolution of cognitive sex differences in this case, rather than large physical sex differences, as in the case of the northern elephant seal. But the principle is the same. It's competition for reproductive access. Now, of course, females have a choice in these things, and they make their choices clear. This, of course, is a peacock, and he's strutting his stuff, and this guy really gets the peahens going. Colorful, has lots of little dots there, and they're probably fairly symmetric. Female choice was debated for a while, kind of what was underlying it, but generally females choose traits that are non-fakeable signals of health and good genes. So good-looking males tend to produce healthier offspring that have lower mortality rates. Testosterone is involved, so we got a partridge here, but many male birds are colorful. Females choose colorful males over duller males as mates. The offspring of those colorful males have lower mortality, more parasite resistance, and testosterone, in this case, increases the red coloration. Now, what's important in this process is that only the healthiest males can tolerate high testosterone. High levels of testosterone, particularly if it's chronic, is necessary for the development of secondary sexual characteristics, but can also suppress immune functions. So you can't simultaneously have both the immune system running to keep you healthy and express these secondary sexual characteristics unless you're pretty healthy. And experimental studies show if you take an unhealthy male, pump him full of testosterone, he looks real good until he dies. And then his mating success goes way down. So there's a lot of things going on here. Male-male competition, female-female competition in some cases, and then male and female choice, but it all makes sense in terms of reproductive outcomes. Now we can ask, so how did we get male-male competition and female choice to begin with? And we actually have a pretty good idea of that. And it gets down to sexual reproduction. There's advantages to sexual reproduction over asexual reproduction. The problem is once you have sexual reproduction, you have to have somebody to have sex with and to reproduce with, which can be a problem. But anyway, that's why we have males and females. Underneath a lot of the sex differences in competition and choice are sex differences in reproductive rate or potential reproductive rate. So there's this is fundamental differences in the rate of, potential rate of reproducing. So if you're a female elephant, you're going to gestate for about 22 months. And then you're going to suckle for several years after that. Huge investment, right? So you're only going to produce an offspring every 5 years or something like that. Now, if you're a male elephant, you're the father, you can hang around. You and the female elephant, you can get your own place. The guy can, kind of help the female through it and then, take care of the offspring once it's born. Or the male can head off with the boys and compete for access to another female. Which male is going to have the advantage? The male takes off and gets an apartment with the female, or the one who gets back into the mating pool and begins to compete. Given this 5-year difference, the males who opt for competition are going to have an advantage over those that stick around to invest in parenting. Now, this and this are intimately related, and both are related to patterns of competition and choice. Generally, the sex with the slower rate of investment, the slower reproductive rate is going to invest more in parenting. When you invest more in parenting, you become a resource. Why? Because all individuals are kind of biased to reproduce. And if your offspring needs investment to survive and be competitive later in adulthood, whoever provides that investment is a potential resource for you. So high investment means high demand as a mate, meaning the faster reproducing sex tends to compete more. And if you're in high demand, you can be picky, right? So choice becomes more prevalent in that sense. Now, good prediction. Turns out that you can test this prediction by looking at species with what are called sex role reversals. And of course, that's a human-centric view of things. Pipefish and their cousin seahorses, and then there's other species. One example in which males provide more parenting than females. And so the fundamental difference in parental investment and rate of reproduction, as I'll show you in a second, differs. And so we should see male typical things in females and female typical things in males, typical from our perspective. So this is a male, and he is pregnant. And how did that happen? Well, good question. This is a pouch. The female deposits eggs into the pouch, and then he releases sperm into the pouch that then fertilizes those eggs. He benefits because he's sure he's the dad. The female's not gonna dump in some eggs to some other guy. The problem for him then is it takes longer for him to incubate the eggs than it takes for the females to deposit those eggs. And so females can potentially reproduce faster than males. Okay, so the basic reproductive rate differences are reversed relative to us. And so the problem with females now is they got to find unmated males, right? They're off with the girls after they deposit their eggs, and they're roaming for guys. And it turns out that females do become very competitive in these species. This is actually a different species of pipefish, but I think she's cute, so I put her up there. The females are larger, more colorful, which is an indication of health. They're going to deposit healthier eggs that the male is going to want to invest in, and they're behaviorally more aggressive. They will shoo away other females during this. So these types of tests and these types of species differences really kind of are critical tests to the core that sex differences in reproductive rate and parenting really are just two basic principles that then explain competition and choice. Now, it's not that simple because there are differences even within species. Even if you have a kind of a male bias toward parenting or a female bias toward parenting and more competition or choice, you can get variation. This is a two-spotted goby, so you have paternal males. They'll get a nesting site. The females externally lay eggs. The males then provide the sperm and protect them. And the operational sex ratio. If there's more guys around than girls around, who's going to have the advantage in terms of choice? Well, the girls. And the guys are going to have to compete over them. And you could get the reverse. So this is an interesting study looking at breeding season changes. So at the beginning of the season, the males show up. They begin to compete for nesting sites. And the competition can be quite severe and intense. And then they also court the females, trying to entice the females to lay their eggs in their nests rather than some other guy's nest. The result is high male mortality. So a lot of males don't make it through the season. So because so many males die, by the end of the season, females who show up a little later find that there are more females than males, and so the operational sex ratio flips. And at season's end, there's 4 girls for every boy. Sounds good. So in these cases, some males have up to 20 females courting them. He can't accommodate all of their eggs, so he's going to have to choose. The females will have to compete. Same species, same breeding season, but the social dynamics change, and so the focus of competition from male-male to female-female switches. And you're going to find these switches primarily in species where males have provide some type of paternal investment, as they do in this one. Now we can also, as with the northern elephant seals, get different ways of competing within the same sex and same species. So this is a very handsome guy, right? Guys like him? This is a dominant male orangutan, and he does not look very happy, festive there. I wouldn't mess with him. Anyway, so these guys maintain a territory. Females prefer them when it comes to mate choices. But there are other ways to reproduce if you're a male orangutan. And it turns out that this is also a male, called an arrested male. And for some number of males, the presence of a dominant male in the area, region, exposure to him will result in this arrested development. A little bit smaller. You don't have these patches puffed up here, these dominance signals puffed up. But these guys still produce sperm. In the wild, they will sneak into territories and attempt to mate with females, and it's an alternative strategy. And if this dominant male dies, this male his physical development will kick back in, and soon thereafter, he will look like that. So here we have very kind of just the social presence of a dominant male can affect the reproductive strategy and even the physical looks and development of the other male. Again, same species, different ways of expressing competition. All right, well, that's all well and nice, but what about people? Aren't we different? Aren't we special? Well, some people are special, but as we'll see here in a bit. But can we really apply these basic principles to humans? Well, without actually having data. And there's different ways to do this, and I think the best way is to use a variety of different techniques. Use comparative cross-species studies, so we know the basic principles: competition, choice, reproductive rate. Anthropological studies, and more recently, population genetic research is now available. So across species, as we saw with the northern elephant seals, although that's at the extreme end of it, larger males and females is a very good indication of some degree of physical male-male competition in polygyny. So when you have monogamous species where you don't have a lot of male-male competition, males and females tend to be about the same size, and they look very similar to one another. And we know that males are bigger than females, about 5 inches across societies. There's all sorts of cardiovascular difference, muscular differences, particularly upper body types of things, lots of physical differences. Anthropologically, one-on-one and kin-based coalitional male-male competition is common in traditional cultures. Conflict is frequent, not meaning they're out beating on each other every day like the elephant seals, but once a year or every now and then, conflict arises and can have fairly dramatic consequences. So across societies, if you look at the sources of mortality, about 25% of males will die as a result of either within group, so showing a bit, or between group male-male competition. All right, as you know, we get the Y chromosome from dad if you're a guy. If you're a girl, you don't get a Y chromosome. And so we can look at the distribution of Y chromosomes in populations, and we can also look at mitochondrial DNA, which you get from mom. And from that, we can make inferences about kind of the history of that population. Basically, one thing that this suggests is we have fewer male ancestors than female ancestors, just like in bowerbirds, fewer males reproduce than females, as in voles, as in the gobies, because a lot of them die, as in the northern elephant seal, there's fewer male ancestors than female ancestors, and that follows directly from male-male competition. There's some other patterns there, but I'll skip over those. So, now, people are a little more creative than gobies. A little, well, some people are. These people may not be. And so there's different ways to express core interests, motivations, and so forth. People explore things, they're curious, and they try to kind of understand the world in ways that, in a range of ways that we don't see in other species. And I hope this works. These are some undergraduate engineering students, and they're exploring kind of a discovery learning type of thing, exploring motion, ramps, trajectory, and other types of things, much like Galileo did in the 16th century. So here are these guys, a very good example of human creativity.
One video. No, everyone take your side. I'm pressed. Oh, shit.
That went completely wrong. Went completely wrong.
Now, that sort of thing isn't in our evolutionary history, but humans are capable of doing it. I'll give you some more interesting examples here shortly. But more seriously, competition, believe it or not, should mention, I don't know if you believe this, but accidental injuries are much more common in men than women. I know you find that hard to believe. So here we have male-male competition in a traditional culture. This is the Yanomamo. And we have both males, human men, have two different ways, two different interests in terms of dominance-related things. They're interested in establishing group dominance within the group, so position within an in-group dominance hierarchy, and they're concerned about their group status vis-a-vis that of other groups. And these two interests are actually only weakly correlated with one another. So you can be a Mizzou fan, or say you're on the football team, you may be a star, so you're high in the dominance hierarchy, but even the lower status males are probably very interested and motivated for their team to do well. So this is a Yanomamo male, and he is having a bad day. He needs a hat. What is that? Those are big welts on the top of his head. And these guys, there's different ways to resolve in-group conflict, but things can escalate to where they get big long sticks and whap each other on the top of the head. Sounds like a good thing to do if you're irritated with somebody. And the result is often that. In one society that I read about, the mortality rate as a result of these club fights was about 8% of males died as a result of them, but typically it doesn't escalate to that point. And this is a high status male because he has lots of welts. He has survived lots of club fights. So the kind of within group dominance stuff can escalate. Between group conflict is also common. And here we have a bunch of Yanomamo as well. They're not heading to the cotillion for the Saturday night dance. Well, I suppose they'd have a smashing time at the debutante ball. I think they'd enjoy it. They're getting ready for a raid. Between group conflict occurs in these societies. Often results in cycles of blood revenge. Somebody kills one of your kin, you want to retaliate at some point, so forth. Keeps competitors at a distance. Is important for political influences. Big groups. These guys want to marry your daughters. Are you going to say no? Well, it depends. If you got more of them, you might. If you don't have more of them, you might not. So this sort of thing happens. It's male-male competition within and between groups. So if we look at mortality rates, this is from Keeley, War Before Civilization, across a variety of cultures. See, in this particular culture, almost 60% of men die as a result, die at the hands of another man, typically during one of these between group encounters. The group you just saw is right here, and they're typical. They're kind of at the mean of across these cultures, about 25% mortality. And we see when they're doing men are engaged in this aggressive behavior, they're not targeting women. Sometimes it happens, but that's not their goal. They're trying to kill other men, which is what happens as a result of male-male competition. Happens in other species. Now, fortunately for us, when guys get irritated with one another, well, we don't have big long sticks for faculty meetings, so it could be that things would escalate to the stick fights, club fights in faculty meetings, but probably not. In societies such as ours, we have central government, we have police, we have formal laws, we have socially imposed monogamy, meaning that guys can only get married to one woman at a time. And these things modify the expression of male-male competition. If you have socially imposed monogamy, there's one girl for every guy, and so men don't escalate as much. Why? Because the benefits are lower and the costs aren't worth it because they're going to find somebody anyway. Men still compete for cultural success. These guys aren't Yanomamo, but they're competing. This is Chicago commodities traders. So they're trying to sell pork bellies. Same thing. They're competing for success in their niche. And what's interesting about modern economies, modern societies, you get big groups of individuals. You have the possibility for economic specialization. You have the creation of many, many different niches. And there are many different ways to compete in these niches. This is skateboards. And here we have an example of this. There are not... Gets better. It's coming up, coming up, coming up. Oh, there it is. All right, that's enough. So these guys are not in a penal colony. There aren't armed guards forcing them to do that. There are no, actually, I have one more clip, sorry, right after this, and that'll be the last one. There are no skateboards in our evolutionary history, thankfully. But they're competing with one another. They want to look cool. They want to be the best skateboard rider. They're trying to outdo one another. So the tricks they're trying to do, what they're trying to do escalates within this niche and culturally. But the basic principle is the same, the torch. The basic principle is the same. They want, okay, stop. The basic principle is the same. They want to outdo other guys within this niche. It's male-male competition. Now, you guys have watched Fantastic Four. You may have seen that movie. I actually didn't see the movie, but I used to read the comic books. And there was a Human Torch. Is he in the movie? All right. So this is and he's a superhero, right? Somebody you want to emulate and be like. This is the Human Torch on acid. There it is. Oh, he missed. Ouch. Anyway, so I don't know. You guys want to see that again? No. Oh my God. No, he was fine. He was fine. He does that for a living. I saw that clip on True TV and thought, I just got to get this clip for something. And he was actually fine afterward. I mean, it didn't actually go as he planned, but you know, that's what he does. But so I did Google searches and tried to find it. It took me a long time because there were so many other examples of guys who were setting themselves on fire, either intentionally or accidentally. There's many examples, and they're all pretty funny. Why is he doing this? Well, he's doing it for attention. He's trying to outdo other guys. He said after this event here that he got on TV. We're seeing him here. He's a hero to some folks. He has followers. He wants to be the next Evel Knievel. Obviously, our ancestors did not set themselves on fire and ride bicycles off of buildings. At least not many of them did. But the competition and the way in which, so the underlying motive is the same. In this niche, he wants to outdo all of these other guys. I'm not sure he succeeded in this case, but. So big economies, big societies, big cultures lead to different niches, different specializations. High status skateboarders, not the same as high status on Wall Street, but the motive is the same. Everybody interested in this, the guys want to move up the status hierarchy. Now, the skateboarders we saw, some of them may never reproduce, but generally, culturally successful men have more mating opportunities. So men who are successful, you know, there are skateboard groupies. And I guess this guy who lit himself on fire will probably reproduce, and he probably has female fans. I don't know what his little kids are going to look like, but that's another issue. Successful men have more mating opportunities. They're less likely to remain childless and more likely to remarry a younger woman if they divorce or if their wife passes away. Large-scale study in Sweden looking at the top 25% socioeconomic status and the bottom 25% of about 50-year-old guys. 1 out of 3 men in the lower group never had a kid and probably never will. The difference in the top 25%, top quartile, is only 10% are childless. If you go to more extremes, these differences are going to get bigger. So there's some confusion in the literature here. So if we just look with men with children, we exclude these guys, there's no relation between income and number of kids. But if you throw in the childless men, income matters. And again, that's just average number of kids as you move further and further away from one another on the status hierarchy. The bigger these numbers get. These numbers are greatly attenuated in cultures such as ours and in Sweden here because mortality rates are much lower and because of birth control. Otherwise, these differences would be much bigger. These differences would probably be bigger as well. But the same pattern is there, just expressed a little less intensely. Now, socially imposed monogamy, as we have in Western cultures, can shift men's focus from mating effort to parenting. So you can spend your time trying to become successful and attract additional mates, or you can spend your resources and time taking care of your kids. Now, in these cultures, happily married men have lower testosterone. Lower testosterone is associated with greater sensitivity to kids and greater parental investment. We do have a confound here, though, because men with higher testosterone are a little bit more irritable. They irritate their wives more. They do things that piss their wives off, and so they get divorced more. But if we look at the same men across time, we see some interesting differences. So can't see it very well, but this is kind of 0 point, and this is years before 0 point and years after 0 point. The dotted line is marriage, and this is divorce. And so the 0 point for marriage is the year the same men followed over time got married. And we'll see kind of out here where they're really starting to compete for mates, testosterone is high. The year or so before marriage, it kind of drops a little bit. Presumably, they're in a fairly stable relationship. And then once they're married, testosterone drops and stays low. Cortisol, stress hormone levels drop and stay low as well. This is divorce. So these guys are married out here. Testosterone is low, just like these guys, often the same guys. In the year or so prior to the divorce, presumably when there's a lot of conflict going on, the relationship is strained, and split is imminent. Testosterone increases, and it stays high for a year or two post-divorce. Typically, this is the mate search years, and then it drops, and many of these men are now remarried, and the testosterone drops. So same guys, it's not just having low basal or high basal testosterone that influences these things. The dynamics of the spousal relationship can influence these patterns, in this case testosterone as well, which in turn can influence whether they're focused on finding another mate or on taking care of their kids. The one exception to this is here. Men who are open to an affair, looking for another mate, have high testosterone. So they're still psychologically focused to some extent on mating effort, and their biology reflects that. Now, if we look at testosterone and marriage in polygynous cultures, we don't see this drop. The testosterone levels stay high. So you get married, but testosterone stays high. Why? Well, because in polygynous cultures, their next chore, so to speak, is to get the resources they need to marry their next wife. So they remain in the kind of mating pool and in the competition mode, whereas that's not the case when you have socially imposed monogamy, or at least not as often the case. Now we have variation in female choice. There is a common core to this choice throughout the world, and women's choice, but there's also variation that makes sense. So throughout the world, men are, in a sense, resource objects for women. So this is a large-scale cross-cultural study that just had women rated in a 0 to 3 scale. All of these, what's important in a long-term mate. And one of the areas, 2 areas where differences came up, physical attraction and kind of financial prospects, success, so forth. So the importance of good financial prospects, a long-term mate, we see in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North America, and South America, women rated higher than men. In context with high child mortality, which is many non-modern contexts, a lot of kids die in infancy, many more die before the age of 5, and so you can get up to 50% mortality in a lot of these situations. And the cultural success of the man will be inversely related with the mortality risks to his offspring. So successful guys who have social influence have lots of stuff that they can invest in their families or give to their wives to invest, and the families have lower mortality. So cultural success in many contexts often meant the difference between several of your children living or dying. In other contexts, even without high mortality risks, women married to higher status men, higher status than themselves, report higher marital satisfaction and have lower divorce rates than women married to less successful men. So it matters in terms of what women say, the outcomes for their children, and the stability of their relationship. Now, being successful is important in men's, but the importance of this varies across cultures. It varies with levels of cultural success and with women's access to wealth. So finding a high status guy with lots of money and so forth isn't always the optimal choice, because a lot of these guys can be assholes, right? His money's no good to you if you can't get him to spend it in ways that you want him to spend it, right? So personality and individual traits of the guy is important as well. So the importance of wealth, this is another, a different study, actually several 100,000 people around the world participated in this one. The importance of wealth is rated lower for women living in wealthy nations with social welfare and high taxation relative to other societies. So if you live in a society where everybody gets an apartment, everybody gets health care, there's high taxation to pay for that, which reduces men's, the variance in men's wealth, and also reduces the importance of having that wealth for kind of day-to-day types of things. Women don't focus on the wealth of a prospective partner as much as they do in other societies where these things aren't there. So if all guys made $40,000 a year, women wouldn't rate wealth as important. Why? Because it's a given. They don't have to worry about it. Doesn't mean it's not important. It just means they're not thinking about it, and they can shift to other priorities in May. Relative to women with lower incomes, women with higher incomes rate a man's wealth as less important. So if you have access to your own money and resources, you don't need as much from the guy. So you can kind of switch your preferences a bit. Now, they still rate it as more important than guys do, the same income levels, but not as important as women do with fewer access to resources. Okay? So the personal and behavioral attributes that women find important in men, there's a common core there, but the weightings differ. So among professional women in individualistic, wealthy societies, such as ours, women rate men's sense of humor, kindness, honesty, communication skills, and so forth as being more important in a long-term mate than do women in other contexts. Now, this is in part due, I suspect, because in the professional classes in modern societies, people move away from their kin, they move away from their long-term friends, and so forth. So they lose a lot of their social support that they would otherwise have, and so the marital relationship becomes a more primary source of support than that. And if you're going to have a source of support, you want a guy who's funny, nice, honest, and so forth, right? Just helps. Now, it doesn't mean that other women don't want these same traits in a guy, but they're luxuries. Why are they luxuries? Well, because other things are more important. You got to keep your kids alive. You got to get enough basic resources to survive. So it'd be great if you could have all of this, but if the basics aren't a given in your society, or if you don't have the resources to do it yourself, then you need to focus on other things. So in less wealthy settings, a husband's social respectability, competence, and responsibility are more important. So you're going to go out to work in the field, in the factory, so forth every single day and do it consistently. Whether he comes home and is engaged in lively, festive chatter afterwards is less important than actually doing what he needs to do to keep the family going. Now, child rearing, parents don't create sex differences, but they can attenuate or exaggerate their expression and in ways that make sense. So very quickly, because I'm running short of time, across species, sex differences in rough and tumble play fighting are common when you see sex differences in intersexual competition. So in species where males beat on one another, young males will often play fight. In species such as spotted hyena, where the adult females are very aggressive, you get a lot of female-female play fighting. And so it's kind of preparation for that. In humans, believe it or not, if you cut a bunch of little guys loose and you don't watch them, starting by 3 years of age and going on until, till well into adulthood probably, you get rough and tumble play. Begins to emerge by 3, peaks at about 10 years of age, where about guys at this age will spend about 10% of their time roughhousing. Observational studies, believe it or not, boys hit, kick, shove, push each other, and they have a great time doing it, 3 to 6 times more frequently than girls. Three Stooges, you guys know who the Three Stooges are? How many of you like the Three Stooges? Yeah, they're great. I mean, they are funny. Men tend to like it more than women. And this is all they're doing, is they're play fighting. It's kind of mocking that. But anyway, in kids, rough and tumble merges into physical aggression and fights by adolescents. And these boys are rated as more dominant by their peers and by teachers, and the chicks like them. Okay? Just as in other species. All right, but this can be exaggerated or toned down. This is from the Sioux. They tended to have a lot of between group fighting and polygamy. And this is one of their games for their kids, for their boys. The swing kicking game took first place as a rugged conditioner, and there was no pretense at horseplay. Here, 2 rows of boys faced each other, each holding his robe over his left arm. The game was begun only after the formality of the stop question, shall we grab them by the hair and knee them in the face until they bleed? Then, using their robes as a shield, they all kicked at their opponents, endeavoring to upset them. There seems to have been no rules, so the boys attacked whoever was closest, often 2 boys jumping 1. Kicking from behind the knees was a good way to throw an opponent, and once down, he was grabbed at the temples with both hands and kneed in the face. Once released, the bloody victims would fight on, kicking and kneeing and bleeding until they could fight no longer. As Iron Shell explained, some boys got badly hurt, but afterwards we would all talk and laugh about it. Very seldom would fellows get angry. You know, just like Larry and Curly and Moe and the Three Stooges, they'd hit each other, but it was all in good fun. But you don't see this at the mall, right? You know, moms pull together a play date for their boys, and you don't see encouragement of this sort of thing. What do you more typically see when the guys start roughhousing? Tone it down, you know, somebody's gonna get hurt. Well, so what? I mean, you know, stuff happens. They get better. Cross-cultural study. So for boys, degree of polygamy is correlated with inculcation of aggression, so a non-parametric correlation, industriousness and obedience to older male kin. So typically in these societies, you have male kin groups, and so there are these age-graded dominance hierarchies within these kin groups. And so when the reproductive consequences of competition and aggression are higher, meaning you can get more wives or you can lose out completely, the expectations for aggression in boys are toned up, as with the Sioux. Democratic societies with socially imposed monogamy, such as ours, we see girls, expectations for girls a little bit different. We get greater inculcation of achievement, cultural striving, industriousness, and less for submissiveness. makes sense in these cultures. These girls are expected to provide some resources on their own and to compete socially. So in societies such as our own, expectations, cultural influence, so forth, likely reduce, sometimes maybe exaggerate, depending on exactly what it is. Sex differences, they don't create them because we see the same basic patterns, even though on the surface they appear to be different. Underlying that surface is very, very similar motives. So it's not really a matter of biology versus culture. There's a common core to people throughout the world, and there are different common cores to men and women throughout the world. Cultural rules and traditions, socially imposed monogamy, women's access to education, labor markets, influence the extent to which and the ways in which sex-specific cores can be expressed, kind of the form and intensity of male-male competition, for example. Interpersonal dynamics, marital quality, social factors, the operational sex ratio. I didn't talk about this, but this can have a big influence on the intensity of male-male competition or female-female competition, choice, and so forth. And this varies across cultures, across historical periods within cultures. The late 60s, 70s, there was a mismatch there where there was more reproductive age women available than men for a variety of reasons. And that led to disco and all sorts of other things that are thankfully gone now. So things like gender politics, I think, are really about changing the rules and tradition to enable the expression of sex-specific cores. Men prefer some things, women prefer other things, and kind of changing these so that you can get your preferences is really what this is about, and what all politics is about. Okay, that's it. Oh, yeah. Sure, yeah. Had not reproduced yet. Okay, so the question is, if we look at guys who are probably not old enough, so they're probably not going to reproduce. You look at the top quartile and bottom quartile in terms of socioeconomic status. The probability of going childless is 10% in the top quartile and 33% in the bottom quartile. How do you know that is men in the top quartile, kind of better able to express their evolved bias or desire to attract a mate and reproduce, versus maybe the lower status guys are just choosing not to reproduce? Is that what you're saying? Okay, so guys who don't make a lot of money don't want to have sex? Is that, no, I understand what you're saying. The guys who are successful are better at attracting reproductive partners, long-term mates. If they divorce, they're better at attracting a younger mate. The point is that men compete in ways that will allow them to be successful in their culture, however that is expressed. In our cultures, it's education, income, and so forth. And the point of that slide was to show that even in societies where you don't have the child mortality sorts of things, and lots of folks kind of get basic stuff taken care of, as in Sweden, even there we'd expect it not to be so important. You still get these reproductive differentials. And whether it's, well, there's no way that getting cut out of the reproductive pool is not biological, okay? Even if it's a social choice, men who make that choice are obviously excluding themselves, and therefore the men who compete for success and you know, a wife and a mate are necessarily, I mean, it has to be biological. I mean, it will end up that way, even if it starts out social. Yeah, most of these things are probably kind of subconscious. I mean, you don't think about, well, I mean, some women probably do think about, oh, you know, what's my kid's going to look like or whatever. But the guy who sets himself on fire, I mean, what are my little boys going to do when they're alone in their room? But probably it is, it's kind of, they're just attracted to guys who are successful and dominant, have influence, have control of resources. And the result of that is that the, you know, they have more resources for their kids. Uh-huh. Yeah, great question. So, you know, I focused on male-male competition and female choice because these are the most common types of things. But as with the goby and a lot of other species, including humans, particularly when you have males investing in offspring rather than putting all their energy into competing, you do have male choice. Men become picky, particularly in societies with socially imposed monogamy, successful males who would be attractive to a lot of females get to choose. And females compete with one another to get to attract the attention of these males. And they can compete with one another in a variety of ways, making themselves look more attractive in ways that'll get guys' attention, or they can use more aggressive types of means to compete. And that's there, absolutely. I just didn't have time to talk about it. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, so the question is, could women be interested in wealth in these different cultures for different reasons? Well, if we look at the relationship between access to wealth and social influence and child mortality risks in traditional societies and in pre-industrial, industrializing Europe, the US, and other countries before the demographic shift and before reduced mortality rates, there was quite a strong correlation between access to wealth and mortality, child mortality. Made a big difference. And whether that wealth is access to land and cows or sheep or access to money doesn't matter because it's all transferable into influence and access to resources that are then going to be invested in your kids. Now, in these societies, you can get a disconnect between access to resources and mortality risks, but that's a very, very recent phenomenon and still isn't true in many parts of the world today. The bottom line is women who are interested in these things had more surviving kids, no matter what the context. Uh-huh. Well, as with many things in life, there's a trade-off. Everything's a trade-off. The real benefit to police force and suppression of male-male competition in polygamy is that you reduce greatly the levels of violence within the culture. You don't get these 25% of men killing each other to get status or to be marriageable. The cost is that the guy who set himself on fire is probably going to get married. And those skateboarders are probably going to get married too. Why? Because when you have socially posed monogamy, the most attractive guys are just going to be married to one woman, which means other women kind of move down. So it's a trade-off. Probably, I'm sure we're better off with these constraints. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, of course. So the question is individuals with ambiguous genitalia or maybe other types of prenatal sort of hormonal influences, how do they fit in here? There are quite a few studies of girls with congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So the adrenal glands produce too much androgens early on. Their genitalia tend to be a bit masculinized early on, but that's treated. But they've had a hefty dose of varying degrees of male hormones early on. They engage in more rough and tumble play, less parenting behavior. Their behavior tends to be kind of in between that of their sisters who don't have this disorder and typical guys. So yeah, it is studied, and it does tell us something about human nature. Another question? Did I see a hand?